So the project kind of initiated with Kearney Healthcare as a pilot projects to review the thermal wheel optimization or low impact strategies that could be used in each of the hospitals. So Kearney Healthcare did a site visit that with Alan back in February and collected all the data. And since then, we have been working with Alan to optimize this system. So this is kind of the summary where we are. And focus of this prior to COVID has been mostly on reducing the GHG emissions and maximizing the use of the heat wheels or thermal wheels. And then it's kind of shifted with the COVID to make sure that all the facilities are aware of where they have the heat wheels. They want to make sure that they kind of at least comply with the latest ASHRAE recommendations on the heat wheel and make sure that the heat wheels are not as a source of contamination, and which kind of was previously covered and it presents the least risk. And we're going to cover all of those items in this section. Again, as a goal of this pilot project is kind of two strategies. One is to develop the low cost optimization control strategies, and also to reduce the utility cost and GHG emissions in the facilities. So the goal of this pilot project is that once whatever comes out of this, it's going to be transitioned into a cohort project with multiple hospitals taking part of this as a cohort project where we learn from each of the hospitals and kind of make this as an ongoing good practices for thermal wheel, which comes out as sort of a case study or a checklist for the rest of the hospitals to be used for within their facility. So just as a scope of this project or pilot project was looking at Alan's facility and going over two of the major systems, and then sort of similarly applying a high-level conceptual framework for the rest of the systems to understand what are the key elements in those thermal wheels that could be optimized as a low-cost strategy. I'm going to bring Alan to the conversation in a second. Just going to give you a brief sort of description of what this project looks like and what are the things we reviewed. And then I'm going to bring Alan to the conversation of what's currently happening with this facility right now. So this is a typical schematics of at this Markham Stouffville site where you have a preheat coil that's serving as a coil that heat up the air before it goes into the thermal wheel. So in this case, you see a thermal wheel. It could be slightly different within your hospitals. You might have a bypass dampers around this thermal wheel, especially in a lot of the newer facilities. We have seen that as a normal use, especially when the thermal wheels are not running. At least you could have a least amount of pressure drop across through those dampers rather than running or pushing the air through a whole of this wheel. And then downstream, there's a heating coil that make up of any of the remaining heat needed that's not served by heat wheel during the coldest weather. So this is sort of the typical configuration for most of the Hernley units that Markham Stouffville has. So one of the key things that we initially, when we were speaking to Alan, when we were site on the facility folks and looked at the BAS trend logs and also the graphics, one of the key things that came out of that, all of the preheat set points on all of these thermal units were set at either 8, 3, or 6 degrees C. This was kind of a red flag when we talked with Alan and I kind of asked them about like, where did this set points came from? Because typically, or generally, when you see the set points that are being recommended or the heat wheels are designed for, or thermal wheels are designed for, usually around -16. You don't have to run those at -16. There are facilities that are actually running it at -16 Alberta, and we worked with one of them in South Calgary campus. They're currently running these heat wheels at -16 and actually maximizing all of the thermal efficiencies out of these. But to start with, these actual preheat set points were way too high for the heat wheel to work. So within those set points is actually, there's very few hours that are left when you would actually need the heat wheel. So which was basically not maximizing the heat wheel operations and resulting in higher gas usage in the facility. So another thing that came out of that analysis was when we looked at the heat wheel actual performance during the coldest period, we noticed that if you could look, I kind of summarized the information you're seeing on the graphs on the left-hand side in that table. When you look at the heat wheel performance during the coldest period, you would expect at least close to the design values. But when we actually summarized the sensible capacity of that wheel running at the coldest period, it was only 37% of the design. So that kind of triggered a few things for Alan and his team to look at what is happening, what is causing these low or this sort of deterioration in their capacity of these wheels, which could have otherwise given them the whole capacity. I mean, these are two basic reasons. One is the preheat set points were too high, and the second, the wheels itself were not performing. So Alan, if you're online, I'm just gonna bring you into the conversation at this point. Can you kind of brief us on what is what's happening right now with your maintenance side of the heat wheels, and are you kind of progressing with some of the items? I know you engaged heat wheel contractor, also tap contractors. Can you give us a summary of where this currently sits and what do you guys have so far found on your site?
Muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Hello?
you, Alan.
Okay, good. So yeah, I have actually a contractor on site today, and he's looking at the heat wheels, looking at the bearings, the seals, belts, seeing how if the heat wheels are dirty, and then we'll look at cleaning the heat wheels and making sure that the mechanicals of the heat wheels are functioning properly, especially the seals, right? Especially now with the COVID, just to make sure that those seals are performing properly. So I should have a report, hoping by Thursday on next steps.
All right, thanks, Alan. Just gonna keep going because we have a limited time left. So just a sort of summary of the impact that these heat wheels create or thermal wheels create on the overall savings, and especially if you have on their sites. So this is just a sort of summary of if we were to run these heat wheels or thermal wheels at minus 16 degree period temperature, we would have the expected savings is around 152,000 meter cubes among all the systems. And that's around $50,000 in utility cost savings and 292 GHG emission reductions with overall paybacks of around less than a year. The good thing is, especially in the Toronto weather, you could achieve 70% of the savings even by resetting your preheat temperature to 0 degrees C rather than even going to extreme minus 16 without testing the system. And we are not recommending any of the sites to go to minus 16 without doing the proper protocol on establishing like how you're going to reach to those set points. But just taking the safe side and precaution side, even if you go to minus or 0 degrees C with the preheat set point with the Toronto weathers, you can actually reach 70% of the savings without even getting into potential issues with any of the coil freezing if you're not draining your coils or any of those issues. So, I mean, this is sort of just to give you a comparison of the two extremes that we are seeing within the Toronto bin data analysis we did on the Toronto weather, that the savings are very easy to get. You just have to kind of follow the methodological way to achieve those savings. And this is, I mean, I'm just going to cover those in one of the slides. Is what are the things that came out of with Alan that he's they're currently doing on their site that would help the rest of the hospitals as well to kind of achieve these kind of savings. Typical, I mean, we're going to explore these further with Alan and his team, but these are some of the typical maintenance issues that you would notice on your site. I'm just kind of giving you some of the pictures here. First one on your left-hand side is the wheel with the deformed media due to the lack of the glue. You can see the media is kind of buckling down in that case. You may have two types. There's generally two types of seals in the wheels. The one you're seeing on the middle picture is the brush seal, which you could see there's a huge gap in there. And then there's another type of seal that you see on the picture is kind of off from the hooks that it's being used to place. So the kind of the goal of the maintainer, especially with the COVID, you want to make sure these seals are in perfect conditions. You don't run into contaminations issues. And also another key part of that is to make sure the pressurization, relative pressurization that you have on the supply and the suction side is also maintained during this. There's a few other examples. In this case, you're seeing, here's an example of a seal which is attached to the casing of the heat wheel using an aluminum frame. And then here's an example where seals is intact, but it's actually pushing on the wheel, which is causing a lot of deterioration on the wheel. And then the last one, this is another common one that you see on the wheels, is that when they're off from the bearing, they actually tilts and then the media starts hitting one of the casing elements. So which could happen if you're not maintaining the wheels over the years and the bearings fails in those conditions. So sort of the high level recommendations that are coming out of this pilot projects, and we're going to build on this with the core project with the rest of the hospitals, is to kind of check on your preheat set points. What is your existing preheat set points, and what is the right amount of set point for your facility, for your wheel? And I highly recommend going back to your engineer of record as well as the heat wheel manufacturers to confirm how do you implement those lower set points, making sure that you don't run into issues with any sort of issues with freeze-stat tripping or coil freezing, but kind of developing a strategy on loading their preheat set point based on what sort of thermal wheel or heat wheel you have in the building. Testing airflows to ensure proper balancing of pressures is really key, especially in this age of COVID. We want to make sure that, I'm just going to cover that in the next slide quickly. What does ASHRAE recommends in terms of balancing and pressurization? Cleaning the thermal wheels, making sure they're clean. Inspect the bearing and seals. That's what currently Alan and his team is doing. And also making sure if you're running the heat wheels to lower or to -16 in that range, to make sure those exhaust ducts are insulated, because otherwise you're going to see a condensation built up and icing built on those exhaust ducts if you're going into that extreme condition. And you could do that. There are hospitals currently doing that. And then last but not least is to review the frequency drives operating range. This is what Alan has his team done on this side, is they had to replace some of these or bring in low gear motors, because on certain conditions, these original frequency drives were not able to operate at the low conditions and not able to run the wheels at a slower speed to cover those hours where it could be used, because it was limited by the frequency of the heat wheels. Okay. So just the last slide I'm going to cover on the field measurements and verifications, just making sure, this is a recommendation by the ASHRAE, is that you could find this, and Michael can share it with you as well, is the when you're testing your systems, to make sure that you have a higher static pressure on the supply side and versus the exhaust side. So you can build, whenever there's a purge in happening through the wheel, it's passing there's no contamination coming back into, because you have a negative pressure zone or higher static pressure on the exhaust side versus on the supply side. So this is sort of a template that you can use to test your heat wheels on site.